Gentlemen, she just shattered every record.
Nobody in that briefing room said a word to her for 11 straight days. Not a hello, not a nod, not even eye contact. She was the newest F-18 pilot on the base, sitting in the back row every single morning, and every single morning the room treated her like she wasn't there at all. Then, on the 12th day, a senior officer read her call sign out loud for the first time in front of the entire squadron, and the room went so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum. If you love stories about the quiet ones nobody sees coming, subscribe right now before we start, because this squadron was about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. And I want you playing along with me today. The second you think you know why that call sign shut the whole room up, drop your guess in the comments. Almost nobody gets it on the first try. Let's go back to the beginning, to a naval air station on the Pacific coast. To a Monday morning that started like every other Monday for the pilots of a fighter squadron known, at least on paper, for being one of the sharpest units on the base. Her name was Lieutenant Junior Grade Ava Reyes, 26 years old, freshly transferred in from advanced flight training, carrying a service record that, if anyone had bothered to actually read it, would have raised more than a few eyebrows. But nobody read it. Not carefully, anyway. New pilots rotated through squadrons all the time, and the culture in this particular unit had calcified around a hierarchy that had nothing to do with skill and everything to do with tenure, personality, and who golfed with whom on weekends. Ava was quiet. Painfully quiet by fighter pilot standards, where the unofficial personality requirement seems to be loud confidence bordering on swagger. She didn't talk about her flight hours. She didn't tell stories in the mess hall. She answered questions when asked and volunteered nothing otherwise. In a community built on banter, on nicknames, on the kind of locker room bravado that fills briefing rooms before dawn, Ava's silence read to everyone around her as weakness, as something to be tolerated rather than respected. The squadron's senior pilots, led informally by a decorated but arrogant lieutenant commander named Derek Holt, made their judgment about her within the first 48 hours, the way people in tight-knit units often do, fast and almost entirely wrong. Holt had 15 years of service and a chest full of ribbons, and he ran his corner of the squadron like an unofficial fraternity. New pilots earned their place by proving themselves loud, fast, and fearless in exactly the way Holt understood fearlessness. Quiet wasn't in his vocabulary. Quiet to Holt meant scared. Or worse, incompetent. So for 11 days, Ava sat in the back row of every morning briefing, said her required check-ins in a flat, clipped voice, and was otherwise ignored so thoroughly that even the newest enlisted personnel picked up on the pattern and followed suit. Nobody sat next to her at meals unless the room was full. Nobody included her in the informal flight discussions that happened after hours, the ones where real information actually got passed down, the ones where you learned the unwritten rules that kept you alive in situations no manual fully prepared you for. Here's the part of this story that I think says more about human nature than almost anything else in it. Ava never once tried to fix it. She didn't push back. She didn't try to prove herself in the mess hall with a story or a joke. She just showed up, did her job at a level of precision her instructors back in flight school would have called exceptional, and said almost nothing. Which, in hindsight, should have told everyone in that squadron something important. It didn't. Now, before I tell you what happened on day 12, I want you to sit with a question, and I actually want your honest answer in the comments before you keep watching. Have you ever underestimated someone because they were quiet? Because in almost every version of this story I've researched, that quiet person turns out to be the one who is paying the closest attention the entire time. Keep that in mind, because it matters a lot in about 10 minutes. Let's talk about what nobody in that squadron actually knew about Ava Reyes, because this is where the story gets interesting. Before advanced flight training, before the Navy at all, Ava had grown up the daughter of a career combat search and rescue pilot, a woman named Colonel Marisol Reyes, who had flown some of the most dangerous rescue missions of her generation, and had done so with a reputation for being almost unnervingly calm under fire. Ava had spent her entire childhood on and around military bases, absorbing a culture that taught her, early and permanently, that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most dangerous one, and that real competence doesn't need an audience. At the Naval Academy, Ava had graduated near the top of her class, but specifically avoided any of the attention that typically comes with that kind of ranking. She turned down opportunities to speak at events. She declined interviews for the Academy newsletter. Her instructors described her, in evaluations later obtained through records requests, as exceptionally gifted, deliberately unassuming, a combination that apparently made some evaluators uncomfortable because it didn't fit the mold they expected from a standout. In advanced flight training, Ava's simulator and live flight scores were, without exaggeration, some of the highest recorded in her training class in nearly a decade. Her instructors flagged her early for a specialized track most pilots never even hear about, training for extremely high-stakes intercept and defense scenarios, the kind involving split-second decisions under conditions most pilots train their entire careers hoping never to actually face. She completed that specialized track quietly, without a single mention of it appearing anywhere in the casual conversations that usually surround pilots who've been through it. Which brings us to day 12. That morning's briefing was different from the start, though nobody in the room fully understood why yet. A senior officer from Air Wing Command, a captain named Rosalind Ferrer, walked into the room instead of the squadron's usual briefing officer, and the temperature of the room changed instantly. Senior leadership didn't typically sit in on routine morning briefings. Something was happening. Captain Ferrer explained, in clipped, controlled sentences, that an unscheduled readiness exercise had been authorized for later that day, a live intercept training scenario designed to simulate a rapid response situation against a simulated high-threat target coordinated with an aggressor squadron flying advanced adversary aircraft specifically built to be difficult, unpredictable, and, frankly, humbling for even experienced pilots. These exercises were rare, expensive, and taken extremely seriously, because the scenarios were built to expose real weaknesses before those weaknesses showed up in situations with far higher stakes. Then Captain Ferrer began reading off the pilot assignments for the exercise, pairing pilots with call signs the way it's always done, quick, efficient, no explanation needed because everyone in the room supposedly already knew who was who. Derek Holt's call sign came first, a few nods around the room, expected. Then 2 more experienced pilots, call signs everyone recognized instantly, greeted with the usual low murmur of familiarity. And then Captain Ferrer read the 4th assignment. Lead intercept paired with aggressor command Reaper 2. The room didn't react. Nobody in that squadron had ever heard that call sign before, because Ava had never used it, never mentioned it, never let it appear anywhere near her name since she'd arrived. Captain Ferrer looked up from her clipboard, apparently expecting some kind of acknowledgement, and when none came, she said the name attached to it out loud. Lieutenant Reyes. For a second, nobody moved. Then Derek Holt actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound that he clearly regretted about 4 seconds later, once Captain Ferrer's expression made it very obvious this wasn't something to laugh about. Captain Ferrer, without raising her voice, without any dramatic flourish, simply said, "Some of you clearly don't know who you've been sitting next to for the last 2 weeks." And then she explained. Reaper 2 wasn't a nickname Ava had picked for herself. Call signs in elite training tracks are almost never self-selected. They're earned, usually assigned by instructors after a specific incident, a specific moment that becomes attached to a pilot's reputation, whether they want the attention or not. Ava's had been earned 18 months earlier, during the final phase of that specialized high-threat training track, in a live exercise that had gone unexpectedly, dangerously wrong. During a simulated intercept scenario involving multiple aggressor aircraft, a mechanical malfunction in a fellow trainee's aircraft had triggered a genuine emergency mid-exercise. Not simulated, not scripted, an actual system failure at altitude that put that pilot's aircraft, and the pilot inside it, in real danger. Most trainees in that exercise, understandably, reacted the way anyone would, with controlled but obvious alarm, breaking formation, requesting immediate guidance from instructors monitoring the exercise. Ava didn't break. She stayed on the malfunctioning aircraft's wing, talked the panicking trainee through an emergency procedure in a voice instructors later described as unnervingly calm, essentially walked him through stabilizing the aircraft in real time, while simultaneously continuing to track and respond to the ongoing simulated threat around them, treating the actual emergency and the fake one with the exact same unshaken precision. The trainee landed safely. The exercise, against all odds, was completed, and the instructors who reviewed the incident afterward gave her a call sign that stuck permanently in her file, one that referenced the eerie, almost unsettling stillness she displayed while everyone else around her was, understandably, losing composure. Reaper. Because in the room's telling, she moved through crisis the way something inevitable does, calm, precise, and impossible to rattle. Captain Ferrer laid all of this out to a squadron that had spent 11 days treating that same pilot like she wasn't worth a hello in the mess hall. And I want you to imagine, for a second, what that must have felt like, sitting in a room full of people who reduced you to nothing for nearly 2 weeks, and then watching every one of them realize, all at once, exactly what they'd actually been ignoring. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Derek Holt, according to 2 people who were in that room and later described the moment separately, sat completely still, his earlier laugh apparently replaying in his own head. Ava herself didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't even really react. She simply nodded once at Captain Ferrer and said, "Understood," in the same flat, clipped voice she'd used for every check-in over the previous 11 days. The readiness exercise happened that afternoon, exactly as scheduled, and by every account from pilots and instructors who observed it, Ava's performance did more than justify the call sign. It redefined, in real time, how the entire squadron understood her. She executed the intercept scenario with a level of precision that the aggressor squadron's own commander later called, in an official assessment, some of the cleanest tactical decision-making he'd seen from a junior pilot in years. She adapted mid-scenario to an unplanned complication the aggressor pilots threw in specifically to test the squadron's flexibility, and she adjusted without hesitation, without a single wasted maneuver, in a way that made Derek Holt's own performance that day look, by comparison, noticeably less sharp. By the following morning's briefing, the back row where Ava had sat alone for 11 days had 2 new occupants, pilots who'd previously never acknowledged her, now sitting close enough to actually talk to her before the briefing started. It didn't happen because anyone apologized outright. Nobody in that culture really does that kind of thing directly. It happened because respect, in a room like that, gets recalculated the instant real evidence shows up. And evidence had just shown up in the most undeniable way possible. Derek Holt's relationship with Ava took longer to shift, and honestly, by most accounts, it never became warm exactly, but it did become something closer to professional respect. Pilots who worked with the squadron in the following months described a subtle but real change in how Holt spoke about her, referencing her by call sign rather than avoiding her entirely, occasionally even deferring to her judgment on tactical questions in briefings where, a few months earlier, he wouldn't have bothered asking her opinion at all. What I find most interesting about this story isn't really the moment the call sign got read out loud, dramatic as that was. It's everything that came before it. 11 days of a group of trained, experienced professionals looking at someone every single day and completely missing who she actually was, simply because she didn't perform confidence the way they expected confidence to look. She wasn't hiding anything. She wasn't playing some long game. She was just being exactly who she'd always been, and the room around her had decided, almost instantly and almost entirely based on volume, that quiet meant unremarkable. So here's my question for you, and I really want you to answer honestly in the comments below. Do you think Ava should have said something earlier? Mentioned her background? Let people know who she was? Made it easier on herself? Or do you think the squadron should have known better than to judge her the way they did, regardless of how quiet she was? I've gone back and forth on this myself while putting the story together, and I don't think there's an easy answer. Tell me where you land, and tell me if you've ever been the quiet one in a room that completely underestimated you. If this story kept you hooked, hit subscribe before you go, because we tell stories exactly like this one every single week. The quiet ones who turn out to be the reason the whole room goes silent. And if you've got a story like this you want covered next, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.